If we're not living our freedom, we're not free yet. You know, and that's what I remembered, and really has been a blessing for me, because 20 years ago, almost 20 years, November, it'd be 20 years that I came to Albany. And I came out of a place, you know, in St. Johnsbury, Vermont. Beautiful place. You know, they treated me like a king there, fed me well, and took care of all my needs. And that's the first sobriety I had in I don't know how many years. It was a rehab. And it was a great place for me to go to, because I had an opportunity to incorporate this truth here, to put into reality what this scripture is telling us right now. So they said to me after 3 weeks of being there, well, you know, I think you should go to Albany. They have a good recovery program there. It's away from your old friends, your old neighborhoods. You have a new way of living there. You can start fresh and get reconnected in a sobriety lifestyle. Meanwhile, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking I have a daughter that was about 5 years old at the time in Minnesota, who I thought, you know, my admirable and noble thoughts was to take care of her. I mean, you know, now that I had 3 weeks clean, after 50 years of being, you know, walking in the fog, worse than that, I'm going to go back to Minnesota and you know, prove everybody that they didn't know what they were talking about, because I needed to take care of my daughter. So I called up some people out in Minnesota who I knew out there, one of the ministers I was friends with, and he said, I don't know if that's a good idea, Chuck. He says, come back out here, you're going to fall into the same traps again. You're going to see the same people. You know, my wife at the time was my ex-wife. She's not really that keen on you, seeing you. And you know what? You're probably not going to see much of your daughter as you think you are, because they probably have controlled visits for you once a month under supervision. How are you going to fit with that? So I thought about that a moment. Then I called another guy. I was looking for the right answer. So I called my sponsor out there. And he was a sweetheart. He says, are you crazy? He says, what are they telling you to do there? I said, go to Albany. He said, you better get on that bus and get to Albany before you even hang up this phone. You better be packed. I said, what's it? He says, you ain't got nothing out here. He says, what you're doing is, first of all, what I tell you about sobriety, especially early sobriety, whatever thoughts you have in your mind, do the opposite, because you don't know what you're talking about. That was the first reality of the renewed mind that I started to grasp hold of, that I didn't know anything, and that anything that I thought was the opposite was true, and it worked. That's the miracle of it. It worked. Every time I had a thought, I said, I'm not doing that, I'm going to do this. And sure enough, it worked. So I called Albany, I called Vince. And Vince says, why Albany? I don't blame him. I tell you, I would have said, no way, Albany. He was at least diplomatic. Why Albany? You know, so I gave him the story. He said, all right, come on with it. So I ended up in Albany. That was the greatest thing that I was able to do in my life, was to come here. You know why it was the greatest thing? Because I finally surrendered. I finally gave in to my thoughts as opposed to what could be better for me. God directing these people who had the background, the ability, the education, the heart, all of the things that were involved in giving me the right advice. And I was resistant to it, you know, rebellious, the whole story. So I finally surrendered, and I came to Albany. And most of the people that I'm looking at right here were here then when I came. And you know what happened. It's been a continuous renewed mind walk ever since. You know, nothing was easy. But God is still working. You could see the development, the changes, the improvement, the whole aspect of the renewal in its reality. That's what we need to see in each other. We need to start to see that truth about each other come to pass. Sometimes we don't recognize it in ourselves because, we're fearful, we're uptight, we have a lot of different aspects that challenge those thoughts. But we can see it in each other. And that's what we need to do. We need to look at that truth happening in each and every one of us. How God is working that miracle and new creation. And how that is a progression. It's a progress. It's not a one-time shot deal where you got it all down and you're done. Don't work that way. I don't think it's going to work that way in the kingdom either. I think there's not going to be any unrighteousness in the kingdom, but I think there's a further growth and enablement and progression of growth as we go through eternity. I believe that to be true. We don't use all our minds. If we use less than 10%, 8%, we're at the top of the class. So look at all of over 90-something% that we know of is not even being used. That's why I offered my brain for sale. Mine wasn't used even 8%. They wanted to give me $2 million for it. The doctor, they only want to give him $50,000. But, because it hasn't been used. And, this is something that we need to start to realize, that using the mind is the greatest aspect and gift that God has given us in relationship to his grace. It's starting to allow that mind to come into fruition in its reality and lining it up with the truth. Because in that now, it gets into the heart of our mind where our faith emanates from. And once our faith grabs hold of it, it's a done deal. That's the point of contact.